Recorded live from Portland, Oregon, it's the Transamorous Network podcast. Let's get it on.
It's the Transamorous Network podcast. I'm Perry.
I'm Remy.
And I'm Shannon. Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Good to have y'all here again today. We're having, this is the first show after the election of President Donald Trump.
Dun, dun, dun.
I have no comment.
We're going to keep it clean.
Oh, we got plenty of comments. I know you never not have
I
a
choose
comment.
to take the fifth on that one.
Right?
How about
Yeah,
that?
give her 2 seconds. She'll be there with a comment.
Be there. So we've got lots of good stuff going on today. We've got a fantastic guest. In fact, our guest is the creator of the, so on all of our content, I've been talking about this Facebook group where there's these 30 guys that are actually almost 40 now, of these transamorous men, trans-attracted men who are supporting one another on this Facebook group.
That's awesome.
Yep.
That actually is pretty awesome.
It is pretty awesome. And this group was founded by our guest today, Jonathan Hayden.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Jonathan. Welcome to the
Jonathan.
show.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, guys.
So, Jonathan,
Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So why don't we start the show with a conversation about your Facebook group? Because, I mean, our audience is predominantly trans women who are looking for men who are attracted to trans women and who are going to treat them right, and transamorous men or trans-attracted men who are maybe struggling with their transamory and really need a place where they can learn about their trans attraction or transamory. And you created this Facebook group specifically to support these kind of men. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about your group, including the name?
Okay. Well, first, I did create the group, but it was in partnership with another friend of mine, Troy Kennedy. We've been working together for this past year, trying to develop something for men like us, a support group for men to really be able to come out and to understand who they are and to be proud of who they are.
Amen.
But also to help us properly define who we are. So the Trans Supportive Brotherhood, and the reason why we call it Trans Supportive Brotherhood, because trans supportive goes beyond just the attraction. We believe in not just because they're fathers, brothers, friends, cousins, you name it, who are also supportive of our trans brothers and sisters. So they need to have a group they can feel and learn and grow and understand. So that is why we created the group. And we also created a group also to distance us from the chasers.
Amen.
Yes, this is awesome, Jonathan.
Because the reality is, chasers are also trans-attracted. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But that's what they are. They are chasers, and they're only there for the sex. We go beyond. We are not just here. We don't look at you just because we're attracted to you in the physical form. Our attraction is more on the chemistry and the connection and the spiritualness of it. Because at the end of the day, we need support. Our sisters need support. Our trans brothers need support.
It's a much more holistic, healthy approach.
Yeah.
It really is. It really is.
Nice.
And it also keeps it's for us. It doesn't step on the toes of our trans brothers and sisters who are fighting and who have standing up for their rights. We are here to know that we are support you. We don't run. We don't do anything else. We're here to know that there are men here supporting you by trying to get them to understand and be comfortable with who they are.
So, Jonathan, there's another aspect of the group that you mentioned that we haven't talked about yet, and that is you also created the group in order to define who trans attracted and trans supportive men are.
Yes, because there's really no one. Everybody thinks they know who we are. Some people want to classify us as gay men. Other people want to call us everything else, confused, conflicted, whatever you want to call it. There's no real definition for who we are. There's no medical definition.
Right.
We're often looked at as savage dogs who all we want to do is have sex with women. You know what I'm saying, with trans women. But in actuality, there's more to us than that. We want to love. We want to have families, and so people need to know and understand who we are before they can make judgments on who we are. And the only people that can speak for us are us.
Hey,
in the same way, we can't speak for. We can speak for our plight, just like we cannot speak for the plight of our trans brothers and sisters. We cannot speak for them and say who they are.
Right.
We have
Serious
to say
courage.
in conjunction with our community and who we are. So that's why there are no psychiatrists that know about who we are, the trans supportive, trans attracted, trans amorous. Man, we got so many names for us now. there's no psychiatrist or psychologist. I think, Perry, in one of your earlier shows, which, by the way, I've watched a few of them.
Yay.
But yeah, when you talked about your experience of going to a psychiatrist and how the psychiatrist kept trying to call you gay.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not a gay man. Nothing wrong with it, but that's not who I am.
Right.
And I don't, people like, well, you shouldn't be care about label. No, I do care about sometimes, because if you mislabel me, then you're not getting to know me.
Right.
So you don't know who I am. So therefore, I have to correct you, because I don't want you to say who I'm not. I want you to say who I am based upon what I've told you and what you see and what I model every day.
Right on.
Right
on.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking
I just
about.
gotta say, as soon as some of the trans women see you and hear about, they're gonna lose their mind. They're gonna lose their mind.
I'm losing it.
They're like, oh my God, there are these amazing people out there like this. I had no idea, because so many women don't know that there are great guys and great groups like this.
Yeah.
So.
And that's something that's why I'm glad you guys are here, and I'm glad we're all working to do this, because we have a mission. We all have a mission, and we're out here, especially as you all made reference to the butthole we now have in office. We have to be able to look out for one another,
right?
Absolutely.
Really have to look out for one another, and not and be something more than just looking at it just off physical. We need to really support one another. We need to have workforce development. We need to have things. We need to have programs. We need to have things taught in school so young people can understand. Young people in high school understand their attraction or who they feel that they are.
Right.
Deep down in their heart, we don't have enough of that. We don't have. I come from an educational background, and one of the things I have, and I'm proud of is being a mentor. I've mentored a lot of young men in my previous program, my previous job, and one of the things I come to realize is that I had a young man in my program trying to understand who he was. His mother could not accept the fact that he started to dress. And some of the people at the school couldn't accept the fact he would come to school before he really realized that he wanted to transition. He referred to him as he, but he knew he wanted to transition at one point. And so I had to really sit down and talk with him, really sit down and get him to understand. But that got me realizing that if he's in this program like this, I have other young men in my program who are probably coming through and trying to understand. The best thing about what we do is, what I did with that is I realized that the other young men in my program were very accepting of this young man.
That's awesome.
And where he was going in his life. Now he has transitioned. So now she is living happily.
Wow.
And she remembers the program. And what we did, because we created a community where you have to be safe, you have to be able to be heard, you have to be able to know that the people around you are not going to hurt you. And we have to do something more, because this is very scary. This is a scary world out here.
So Jonathan, it's I want to ask about your personal life and how you came to your own transamory, but before that, characterize the type of men who are in the Trans Supportive Brotherhood Facebook group.
Oh, well, I mean, clearly, as you see,
yeah, baby.
If you want to categorize it, let's start with perfect and all these words. Let's start with the great adjectives. But one of the things I will say with this group, I am proud to be a member of this group. I am proud to help start this group and to be one of the leaders in the group and trying to do this movement. And we have a lot of different men in the group. Yourself, Brother Perry. So we've got professional men. We've got men like me, professional men who've gone to college, educated men, but we also have young men too. We've got some guys in their early 20s still trying to understand who they are, trying to navigate around, especially in the dating world, because they've had a lot of frustrations, trying to understand. So we've got older men, we've got younger men, and we've got the men in the middle. And what I like about that is you've got really a whole bunch of years of experience and really failures in which people can learn from, especially for us who've gone through trying to find our significant other and stuff, the failures in our relationships, what we've learned to teach these younger men on what to look for, how to speak, how to talk, how to not take a woman for granted, how to not be so, not to be buttholes. I hate to say it that way too, but we have to teach all of these things. So that's why that's how I would characterize the group. It's a support group for men can draw upon each other's experiences. We don't talk about women, and we don't bash women. That's the first rule. There is no mentioning of names of girls. There's no putting their pictures up on there. There are no posting nude pics. There's no posting pornography, numbers, any of that stuff. Because the first and foremost thing we believe is protection and safety for our trans brothers and sisters. And posting stuff like that up there and posting people's anger and stuff like that does not help lead to safety. It gets other people to rile other people up. So we don't do that. That's a no-no.
They're changing momentum.
That's exactly right. They're changing momentum. And it's interesting because so I don't know how far Jonathan has gotten in the man's guide that I sent him, but we talk about this phenomenon called momentum of one's stories. And if you continue to tell the same story over and over again, you develop this momentum that begins to create the reality that your stories are talking about. And so one of the big stories in the trans community is that men who are interested in trans women do all the things that your group does not condone. Right. And so by having these principles that say you aren't allowed in this group to do these things, you're creating a new story for the trans community that can change the momentum that leads to conclusions about men who are attracted to trans women. Like they're all chasers. They're all just trying to get their dick sucked. They're all trying to just use me for sex. They're all this. They're all that. And creating it's interesting because he's creating a space starting with the men, just like with the Transamorous Network.
He's coming from a place that you're coming from. Yeah. I think that's awesome. And like when I met Perry and first started talking with Perry, he helped change my momentum and my story about men and my story behind men, because I was in a place where men were scum. They're all just chasers. They all just want me for sex, And when I met Perry, I met a man that was not that. He was actually trans attracted. He was actually transamorous. He actually was looking for more than a sexual relationship. And it spawned our friendship, and it changed my story about men. Not all men are like that. And this group, I think, helps to prove, again, here's 40 men that are not like that.
Yeah.
And I would hope that someone watching this show would, hopefully, a trans woman watching this show would help to change her momentum and her belief system that it's not all men, and they are out there. And, your group has got people from everywhere, all over the country. You know what I mean? So there's guys everywhere. They are there. You know what I mean? And more people I hear are joining your group, which just is more proof that they're everywhere.
Well, let's talk about the demographics of this group, because it seems to me, and I could be wrong, Jonathan, that the majority of the group are African American men.
Thank you. I was going to say something because that's been my experience.
What's been your experience?
As far as like the people who approach me, I see, and I live in a very white city.
Portland very white.
White.
Yeah.
Yes,
But I see a lot of the people of color coming up to me and being like, "Hey, I'm genuinely about you."
Really?
Yes, that's been and it's not just here in Portland, but it's nationwide. When somebody approaches me online, right now it's 100% people of color.
So Jonathan, what is the makeup of the 40 men in the group demographic racially?
Going back, and I wish going back on the numbers, it is primarily African American. However, we are mixed. We are very mixed. There are some trans men in the group.
I did not know that.
That's awesome.
There are two trans men in the group. There are some gay men in the group.
Oh wow.
Openly gay men who are in the group who are also learning to understand and to learn more, and and to grow. And we've got white men, we've got Latino men, we've got black, we've got a little bit of everybody in the group.
That's awesome.
So I couldn't give you the actual demographics of the group. I'd have to give that back to you and break it down. When I look back at the membership group, but for the most part, we are a diverse group, and we get diverse views. And
that's for sure.
I'm sorry.
So I want to just say really quick. I don't want to get too stuck on this, but I don't believe that this is like a genetic thing. I think that this is a cultural thing.
You think it's cultural?
I do. Do you really think that? Do you think it's genetic?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about this.
I think there's probably.
How would you think it's cultural?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Knowing black culture the way I know black culture.
Yeah.
Here's what I think. I think that, and check me. Like if I say something
You
stupid,
might be right. No,
check
go
me
ahead.
If I
Yeah.
say something stupid.
Yeah.
But I think that white folks, for the majority, and I'm stereotyping here, they're a lot more fearful to step out of line. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And a lot, like, they're like, oh, well, I'm a lot more concerned about how I look or how I, what I say, as to where I find that sometimes people of color who have been through more struggle, who have ran the gauntlet, so to speak, they're like, you know what? F it. I'm going to do me.
This goes back to the last show we did about the University of Los Angeles, or University of California, Los Angeles, that survey when we were talking about the racial thing and why white, if there are more trans women of color than there are white trans women. And we said in that show that the reason, we were speculating, Jonathan, that the reason why there are more trans women of color than there are white trans women is because trans women of color are already, because they're of color, they've already been persecuted or treated as less than or what have you. And so what you're saying now about the transamorous men who are of color is, hell, I've already been treated.
That's the only logical
I'm a black man in America.
Exactly.
There are not more trans women of color, and there are not more transamorous men of color. There are more out transamorous men and trans women.
I think that's more. I think that's more of the case. I think there are more people who are more out than who are more. I see a lot more. I don't know why that is. I don't know why more black men are more open to being with trans women and more open and are more being out or willing to be out. I have no idea why.
And that's why I say it's cultural, not genetic. I don't think courage
I don't
is
give a
genetic.
fuck attitude.
What's that?
The I don't give a fuck attitude.
Yeah, it's just like you've been through
so
it. Once you've been through enough, it's like if you live on.
At the same time, I'll say this: looking back in terms of the violence against trans women, how many of that has been mostly African American men?
Almost all of it.
Is it
huge majority? Huge majority.
Right, because there's there's still a lot of, as much as there's, I agree with what you're saying. There's also a lot of, I think, men of color are afraid of what, of people's opinions of what they are, who they are, what.
Just men of color have that fear?
Well, no, I think I think most men, but again, knowing Black culture the way I personally do, there's a lot of stigma and there's a lot of well, what the fuck? Are you gay? You know what I'm saying? Like,
well,
I think my argument would be that exists just as much in the white culture.
Maybe it's my personal experience and not being part of white culture.
I don't think a white guy is going to go to his buddies and say, hey, I like trans women. They're going to be like, oh, cool. No, they're going to freak out just like every other group of cis, straight men are going to freak out. I just think.
Especially if they don't understand what being attracted to a trans woman means.
Yeah.
If they even live in the stereotype that they're gay, then they're going to have a problem with it. I think the reason we have such problems, there's no real definition for who we are.
Right.
There's no category. In the culture believes that we're gay men.
Yeah.
And so the same hatred and violence keeps coming towards us because of the same way towards the gay culture and the gay culture. So if they keep thinking that they don't realize that we are not gay men, we're not this and that, they don't understand us because there's no definition for us.
So let me go back to what Shannon was saying, because this is really interesting. So the violence that is perpetuated predominantly by men of color on trans women correlates.
I think you need to switch that. It's not.
Please.
It's not by men of color. It's on trans women of color. Trans women of color are disproportionately at higher risk for violence than, say, a white trans.
Well, I knew that, but I thought someone in the room said, and it wasn't me. Someone in the room said that the violence, or maybe I misheard what was said. I thought someone had said the people who are committing violence on trans women are usually men of color.
I thought
not
said
usually,
that.
not usually men of color, but there is a significant portion of men of color committing violence against trans women and trans women of color, but not the majority of them. There are some other ones, but unfortunately, when you look at the deaths and you look at the murders and you look at the people, look how many of them are men of color, Black and Latino.
That's what I thought. Okay, so I think that correlates with what you're saying, because whether it's cultural or genetic, if there are more men of color interested in trans women than not men of color, then it seems to stand to reason that you're going to see a higher percentage of violence on trans women committed by men of color, because there's more men of color than white men going after them. And those men who are going after them, some of them aren't as comfortable as Jonathan is relative to what they're doing. And so they're still trying to figure it out. And some of that figuring out includes freaking out, which leads to violence.
You know, I have a hard time wrapping my head around this one, because I disagree with the premise that there are more men of color that are attracted. I think there's an equal number proportionally. I just think that there's more out guys.
Right. Okay.
Or there's a lot more white guys in the closet going to the sex club, going to the back alleys. I mean, not to say that men of color don't do that too, but I think that, like, I just think, you know, and this is probably my prejudice, but I think that people of color have a thicker skin because they've been through more. So they're like, you know what, they have a little bit more courage to do themselves.
Well, it might also be that, I mean, even with cis black men going after cis women, they are more bold. They're more prone to be like, hey, girl, on the corner or whatever.
Well, I think that gets cultural.
Okay, then. So,
which would be my argument.
Exactly. Right. So maybe it has nothing to do with the object of the attention being a trans woman, whether it was a trans woman or a cis woman. It's a brother, and brothers are just more out about going after what they want. So that is cultural, I guess.
Well, that's really interesting, because look at us. We're only 40 guys.
Right.
We're only 40 guys, but clearly, I know there are a lot of other men in the other groups on Facebook, the ones that are about dating and stuff like that. I think there are a lot of men that are more open to being on the DL
than
they are open to being open.
Yes.
I think there's more of that. But I think in terms of men speaking up and standing up, that are openly out about being with women, trans women or trans women of color, whatever you want, there are more people on DL. So I think that's the problem. I said, you've got men that want to be with trans women, but they can't be open with it.
Right.
And that's the cultural thing. That goes back to that cultural thing we were talking about.
And also,
they don't want to be deemed as gay. They don't want to be deemed as weak. They don't want to be deemed as whatever. And the cultural stigma behind it.
Right.
How about this? Just throw this out. Do you think coming from a place of privilege gives you more to lose? And so you would see coming out as gay or coming out as trans attracted or trans amorous to be like, oh, well, I have all this to lose, so I got to be on the DL? Because there is a place of privilege that white people come from. Do you think there's any logic to that?
Well, it's interesting because when Jonathan and I were talking about the event that we're going to be having in a little while, Jonathan was asserting that that trans attracted and trans amorous men tend to be broke men, and so Jonathan's nodding yes, and so the privilege that exists for white trans attracted or trans amorous men, I guess in terms of economics or finance, it doesn't exist. But in terms of their,
do you mean broke financially or broke psychologically?
Broke financially.
And I use the term broke. We could use probably a better term than even broke. But a lot of us are not in the situations where we want to be financially or professionally some. So in many ways, can't afford to do what, like a lot of the older white men who have trans women can do. They can afford to fly them, bring them out, do all the things, really do, and use that privilege. We don't have that. I can't fly nobody out. I can throw you a paper airplane. I can't. I mean, I'm not in that position. I'm not in that position to do that. So I think you have a right. You're right about that privilege aspect of it that many of us don't have.
But let me. So it's interesting that this is something we talked about in the last show too, about privilege keeping those who have privilege from coming out and owning their transamory.
But I don't know.
Go ahead.
I mean, like, okay, our last guest, Shannon, right, comes from a place of privilege and had a much easier time because she came from a place of privilege.
Who was that?
Sarah McBride.
Sarah McBride. If you called her Shannon.
Oh, did I call her Shannon?
We had a guest named Shannon.
I know. I was like,
I don't remember that.
It's okay. Sarah McBride. Yeah. Yeah, she did come from privilege.
And she had a very smooth transition.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. And there are, now correct me if I'm wrong because I don't know them, but I presume that the trans women escorts who are charging $400, $500, $1,000 a night, those aren't broke brothers and sisters, or those aren't broke brothers out there going after those women because they got to afford that money. So not all people who are attracted to trans women are.
I would wonder if most of them are white. or people of color, though.
Right.
I bet you.
Mhm.
I bet you find. I
many
bet you
clients.
find that stat flipped.
I bet
it's
you
just white
do.
guys on the DL.
I bet
Yep.
that's yeah.
Married with children and all that business.
Those ones
Yes.
those ones paying $400 or $500. Yeah, because a lot of brothers gonna try to get a discount.
Right?
I'm glad you said that.
Down.
Right?
$400 or $500. Nah, maybe $250. You know what I'm saying? Something like that. I got $50. What can I do? You know.
Or they go to a sleazy place like the Oregon Theater
Right.
on the first Saturday of the month,
Right.
and they fulfill their whatever
Right.
until
Wait,
the
what's
next
this
time.
place? What's this place?
The Oregon
I'm kidding.
The Sex Theater.
I didn't know anything.
Yeah,
about
there's-
it.
girl.
yeah.
Man, I'm not even in the
Ooh,
loop
girl.
anymore.
It's a hot mess.
It is a
It's
hot
a
mess.
hot mess.
It's hot and it's a mess. Okay, so Jonathan, are trans women allowed in the Trans Supportive Brotherhood?
Actually, no. And the reason why is because we want men to be able to feel comfortable
Safe space.
being attacked. Many of us have been in other groups before that started out maybe for men, but then more women had come in there, and then it got to the point where we couldn't really speak our mind without being called, and really sharing our thoughts without being called, oh, you're profiting off our pain, being vilified, calling us everything under the sun, or calling us misogynist. And I'm like, no, or everything we're doing is wrong. No. So we created a space where men can really speak their mind and be corrected in a proper way if they're incorrect with what they're saying. Without feel like they'll be attacked by every woman who will put their name on Facebook and then spread them around like, don't talk to this guy right here because he's an ass.
Right.
So this is where men can be. This is for that. We've had women try to be in the group and requested to be in the group, and unfortunately we've let them know very kindly that this is really for men.
Shannon has to go to the bathroom.
Sorry.
So,
But we also let the men know, because you've seen our guidelines and expectations. We also let the men know, if you're here to try to date and look to pick up a date, this is not the place to go.
Yeah.
I actually read and looked at your group today.
Oh, you did?
I did on the way here, just to get a
Yeah,
background and stuff to see the what's it, guidelines. Those are the words. Yeah. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
it is pretty cool.
And I did not try to join.
It's a good thing because you wouldn't have been able to apparently. Let's take a break. Shannon's gone, so when she comes back, we'll resume the show.
Today's show is brought to you by The Velvet Rope, Portland's premier adult sex-positive social club. You can find them at www.thevelvetropepdx.com. And if you mention that you heard about them from us, they will get you 50% off your membership fees.
Awesome.